Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of our host, Dr. E. Emotional algebra with Dr. E.
Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. Emotional Algebra is a podcast that helps listeners to understand the subtle calculations people make every day in their relationships with others and explores the known and unknown variables that affect interactions in our everyday lives. It's a podcast to help us all become better people through understanding the different variables that drive our behaviors. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E. Today, we are talking all about side hustles.
This is one for both of us, right?
That's right. So it's very meta. We have a very meta topic today. But not only that, we have two guests who are going to be joining us shortly who are going to talk about their side hustles, their experiences. We're going to talk about some of the emotional algebra that goes into doing a side hustle, deciding whether a side hustle is right to do. But before we get into it, Dr. E, you are Mr. Side Hustle to some degree. You have done a lot of side hustles throughout your career, throughout your life. So let's talk about that for a minute before we get to our guests.
Yeah, well, it kind of fits in some ways my ADD lifestyle. So I've always had a lot of things going on. And when I got into my career, there were always other things I was growing towards. Like I saw what I wanted to do. Going all the way back even to college, I had a company I built and during college, and then I went into grad school and still had some other things going on there. Got into my career, and that's when I started writing books as I built a group practice in my early time, and then I closed the group practice and started writing my books. I then did a lot of media work. For about 15 years, I'd been doing pretty steady media work on CNN, NBC, Fox, HLN, a lot of those networks, while also trying to build my brand. And we had an episode on brand building a couple episodes ago, and it was all with a bigger plan in mind. So I always look at things as, does my side hustle help me grow towards what I want to grow towards? I've worked on starting a few businesses. I've worked on trying to help other people start their businesses in the process of doing what I wanted to do, and even started working to develop some TV show concepts, and really kind of have landed on the podcast because I really feel like it helps me build towards being able to have the presence I want to have, to be able to speak and teach around the world. Remember, I did the work in Haiti and would do those 4-day workshops there. And that was all to have a proving ground for the concept. And then hopefully my goal is to, speak and teach around the world and work with communities that are disadvantaged. Well, I might do keynotes in cities and different places in the world, and go to other areas that just are looking to grow and advance. And those are all the things through what I've done on my side hustles. We're all about either providing an extra income to hopefully be able to further those efforts, or to be able to help enhance the lives of others in the things I do. So that was a really important piece with me, was making sure that everything I did was what we call eustressful, meaning it was a good stress. And then at times it became distressful. And that's when I really had to evaluate, what am I doing here? And is this healthy for me? And is it good for my relationships? Is it good for the other things I want to do at work? And these are the things that we're going to weave into these discussions we're going to have with our guests today.
Yeah, and Dr. E, probably your most visible side hustle has been your TV work. And I wanted to quickly ask you about that, because that is a hustle, and you have to do it sort of, you're at the mercy of the news cycle. You have producers calling you at, I would imagine, all times. And that's actually how we met, was through some of your work on AccuWeather when I was working there. So how is that? How do you fit that in? How do you make time, in your already busy schedule to do that?
Well, that started to become disrupted into my practice. I often would have to let people know I do this other job. It didn't pay. I never got paid for an appearance, with hope of building that relationship with those networks. They'd see my value. And even though I provided value, I guess, for them, they could just call another psychologist or get somebody else in there. But the thing I looked at doing, okay, hey, how is this continuing to help me? But there were times I'd get a call an hour and a half before, and they'd say, hey, can you get down here? That was a lot of the CNN work I did because they were in Atlanta. And I'm right outside Atlanta. So they'd often send a car. I'd be on my phone or try to get a connection with my computer. I'd be doing background research on the issues that were going on. So one of my interviews with the Chilean miners, I had done all kinds of research knowing that they were going to have me off and on all day, when they were pulling the miners out of the mine. So I'd done research on the people in the mine and what were some statistics on them. I did research on the guy who was married and his girlfriend, and they were both, so he had his girlfriend and his wife, and they're both waiting at the top. So I wanted to understand more about that. I did research on the impact of the mining industry on the GDP of Chile, and why they had to pull that off, why mining was so important and why it was so visible to the world. What was the effect on that? So it's not just going on and talking about the news, it's understanding what's going on. During the Chinese plane crash, the MH370 Malaysian plane crash, I did research on one child policy in China and why that affected their country so much, and why then the Chinese government diverted the people who were protesting in China to the Malaysian industry. The Malaysian embassy. So the things you want to look at is when you're doing something, is what value are you adding to it? If you're just there to attend, I think that's one thing. But if you want to add value and you want to add credibility, you want to add to your brand, then you got to be willing to give your side hustle the best you can and be able to often do it quickly. It's about being efficient, because when people aren't able to be as efficient in those other areas, it can take away from a lot. And, so there were times I was losing time with my family, and my wife understood because of the larger goals, losing time with my daughter. So when CNN moved to New York, I kind of thought it was a good time to back out, because I could see it wasn't growing anything permanent with them. And at that time was times when I was trying to develop some television show concepts, that I was also writing those treatments, working with an agent at that time and another producer to try to do those things to further my career.
Right. And I think it's important to point out too, Dr. E, that, viewers may see you on there for 2 to 3 minutes TV spot, but really there's a lot of time that goes into that around in preparation for it and just traveling to the studio. And a lot of that was done before the pandemic, I think, too. So Zoom was not quite what it is now. So you have to play all that, even though the visibility of your side hustle may just be these brief appearances. There's a lot more that goes into it behind the scenes, and that has to really be factored into your decision making, right?
Well, and the other thing is, people would think that I got paid, B, I was doing it all the time, C, I was really busy. So it didn't help me with clients. It didn't add clients to my practice. It didn't sell books, because when I went on, I was not there to push my books. I was there to add to the news, the value to that news peg or to that story. My brand was always bring calm to the chaos. So I didn't feel comfortable saying in my book, The Art of Managing Everyday Conflict, or in my book, The Art of Empowered Parenting, a manual which kids came with, I didn't do that. So that's because I was always looking to adding to the people that I wanted to make them look like stars. That was always my theme that I'd sent to producers, the anchors I work with. And I worked with a lot of anchors, a lot of really neat, friendly people. I enjoyed the heck out of them. Now, the other question is, where are they where were they when I wanted them to, again, support me in my efforts? And that's something I think a lot of times you don't see that interaction. You don't realize what somebody who's contributing to what you're doing, whether it's a network or whether it's a business, or whether it's whether it's helping out a family friend to start a business or something, and that becomes your side hustle, or a family member. You want to realize your value to them, and you want them to realize their value to you. Because just because you're getting paid, it's about a lot more than pay. So that's where I think people really want to focus on those issues too.
Yes. And we should actually talk a little bit about what really is a side hustle. You talked about not getting paid for those TV appearances, but that was still building a personal brand, as you mentioned. So there were benefits to it. Might not have been, direct to your other ventures and whatnot, but there was some. But sort of just to level set on the definition, a side hustle is really a secondary job or business that a person engages in alongside their primary type of work. And it's something that has really been on the rise in recent years. Previously was done more prominently in tougher economic times, but now sort of lots of people are doing it. Depending on the survey you look at from the last couple of years, anywhere between 30 and 45% of Americans are working some sort of side hustle at this point. And the average side hustle earns around $1,100 a month. Some of the most profitable, Dr. E, I was surprised to learn this. And some of the job recruiting sites have done research on this. They found that a DoorDash driver is the most profitable side hustle right now, earning over $5,000 a month on average for people who are
that's
doing
incredible to me.
It's incredible. Uber driver number two, or not number two, Uber driver on the list, over 2,300. Babysitter is up there, almost 3,500 average monthly. Online tutor, over 3,000. So some interesting numbers there. These are the side hustles people are doing to make some real money. But there's all types of side hustles out there, as we know, and those are some of the higher paying ones. And there's all sorts of there's types of side hustles that are making a lot right now, but maybe the potential for a lot of money down the road exists, but maybe it's just a small sort of additional income at this moment. But I think, unless you have anything to add onto that.
Well, I think in that you also want to discriminate the difference between an investment and a side hustle. An investment is something you might put money into. Like I've invested money into a few of my side hustles, and sometimes those were losses. But the investment is something you put money into. You're not looking to have to work that. You're not putting any sweat equity in it or time equity in it. It's just a passive investment that you're hoping to make a return on that investment. A side hustle could be something you invest money and or time into and or passion or effort. And, so that's where you might have an investment of time, but and that's where that hustle is really the extra time it takes and that equity of time that's put into it.
Right. That time equity, that is the differentiator there. You're actually putting some work into it. Okay. So let's bring in our first guest here for today, Dr. Jim Gani. Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. Jim, you have a lot of experience with side hustles, as I understand it. You've done some side hustles in the past. You're currently doing a side hustle. Tell us about what you're doing right now.
Doing right now is I have a small private practice that I've been growing over the last couple of years. It's a little bit unique in that it is completely virtual. Thanks to COVID and some other factors. There was a time where I had invitations to join some people's practices to kind of add on to my primary work at the university. And I always said no for different reasons. And then this kind of more or less fell into my lap. And part of it was, wow, I can work from home and I don't have to go anywhere. I can be home more as opposed to other part-time gigs that have taken me away from my family, away from the house. So that convenience has been really, really good.
And so just understand, so people can understand what you're doing. You're doing basically the same thing in your side hustle that you're doing in your daily 9 to 5, let's say.
Pretty much. I mean, my daily position at the university primarily is providing psychotherapy to college students, which has and always will be a passion of mine. Love working with college students. I do some teaching, some presentations, do some supervision and training. For a long number of years, I was the training director, so I had more involvement on a day-to-day basis with all of the graduate students that work here. Stepped down from that a couple of years ago. But yeah, I mean, yeah, primarily most of it, I spend at least half of my time here doing therapy. And then, of course, in this side hustle, it is 100% therapy.
So how did that get started? What did you do, and how did that, you said during COVID, kind of what
Yeah.
happened that brought you into that, and
Well,
how have you leveraged it?
I was one of those people that now says, don't ever say, never. Don't say, oh, I'll never do that. For me, I was perfectly content with my structured life at the university. I was working in a counseling center full time, living the dream, and teaching as an adjunct professor, same university, which provided an additional source of income, additional way to interact with students, meet a lot more other people. And then when the economy kind of took a downturn, like other businesses, the university was significantly affected. And when they started cutting a lot of their classes, the first thing they're going to do, of course, is in academia, they're going to eliminate the adjunct positions. So most of my teaching time pretty much disappeared. So that hurt financially. So I began looking for another source of income. And it just so happened that the local hospital here at that time was looking for some additional help providing therapy to the nursing staff, some of the other people that work on those units. As you can imagine, these people just went through absolute hell during COVID. At this point, when I was contacted, it was in between the time of the Delta variant and the Omicron. So there was a little bit of a lull. And, Eric, as a therapist, when people come out of crisis mode and things calm down, that's when they have a better opportunity to assess basically how they're doing. And as a lot of people figured out, we're not doing well, not that anybody would in that kind of work environment. So I got to come in, do some therapy with the staff, got to start rounding, and basically I would go around to the different units on a regular basis. That wound up growing a lot more than we expected. It went over really well. A lot of your nursing staff they're tough, and they're like, I don't need therapy. That's for somebody else. But if you stop by the unit every once in a while, hey, how's everybody doing? They're more than happy to talk to you. And a lot of people really seem to benefit from that. I loved it. When the money, unfortunately, the COVID money ran out, I continued to offer my services to the hospital. Part of that was because I had built a lot of these relationships, and I didn't want to just go, hey, folks, they stopped paying me, so see you some other time. Eventually, I had to walk away from it simply because I had to find something else. So once the hospital money dried up, it was like, all right, now what do I do? And it was like, I really liked doing therapy. In addition to working at the university, I really like working with these other people a lot more than I thought. I found it really energizing, whereas I thought, oh man, you don't want a side hustle that's the same thing you do during the day. You're going to burn yourself out. So, because up until recently, the side hustles had always been either related to education, like teaching, or sometimes unrelated. I did professional umpiring for a number of years. I loved that. It was good money. It was working outside. I love baseball. Again, something completely even though some of the, I was going to say, dealing with being a mental health therapist helped maybe a little bit more being an umpire than I thought. But so this turned into, and I will admit, at first, the more attractive part of it was, oh, this would be a way to make some additional money. This would be really convenient, again, because I can do this from my home. It really provides very minimal resources on my end. I've just got to figure out how to get out there and basically be, again, for somebody that's worked at the university for all those years and kind of flown under the radar in the community, I'm well known, but, again, it was always, oh, I don't have a private practice, but I'd be happy to refer you to somebody else. And now it's like, oh, now I'm open for business. And I'm sure you guys know very well in the business world, part of what you have to really be able to do is sell yourself, is to get out there and, communicate with people. And that's not something I enjoy doing at all. I'm not really that gifted at it. So I think that's part of why my practice hasn't grown. But that's okay. Honestly, it's grown enough for me for the present time. So I'm pretty good with that.
Yeah.
Well,
So, hey,
it
first of
sounds
all,
like one of, yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, I was going to say just congratulations on all of that. That is, it's not easy to grow something when you're doing it on the side. My other question, and Dr. E, get to you right after this, but I just wondered if you could give people a sense of how many hours you're doing in your 9 to 5 and how many you're devoting to the side hustle. So like, what's the total hours per week that we're talking about?
So I'm still teaching at the university, but at a much smaller, maybe 1 to 2 classes a semester, which is funny because to a lot of people that would seem like a lot. I definitely do a lot more. I don't want to say preaching, but emphasizing to my clients these days that, hey, there's a difference between healthy and normal. I got to a point at the university where I was working full time, and then I was teaching 4 to 5 classes a semester. And to me, that felt normal. That doesn't necessarily mean it was healthy, but to me, so when I wasn't teaching nearly as much at first, I kind of felt like, man, you're being kind of lazy. You need to get off your butt and find a little bit more to do. So, and
I think in here,
about, I'm sorry, I was going to say that's, so at these days it amounts to about, I'd say about 45 hours a week, roughly. And then the additional therapy is about 15 to 20 hours a week. So on the one hand, I go, oh, that's a lot. But again, it doesn't feel as much as some other things I've done because I'm home all the time that I'm doing, the side gig. Stop that. Sorry, the dog's getting a little ornery. I just thought I'd stick them in their little cameo.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think you're talking about, Jim, is, and I know this in psychology, is the difference between eustress and distress.
Right.
And it sounds like what you have done, most of all, your side hustles have all been eustressful, and that can actually even be good for health. It invigorates you, it keeps you on focus, it has you feeling integral. I think, you looked at it, well, gee, if I'm not busy, am I adding something? And that's a question I want to ask you about your own emotional algebra in yourself. Is, do you feel like to feel good about yourself, you have to stay busy? And then what do you feel like are the underlying emotions that might drive that belief?
Oh yeah, I definitely, some of that is in order to feel good about myself, I should be busy. And some of that is in order to feel good about myself, I should be busy doing something that pays. I grew up with a father who grew up during the Depression, who basically hammered into his kids, not like work like a dog, but basically, hey, hobbies are okay, but, are they paying you for it? You know,
Mm-hmm.
how can you
Mm-hmm.
contribute financially more to your family? My dad was, grew up during the Depression, an only child, kind of one of those sad stories where, he quit school and takes care of his family. So he pretty much, infuses us that, hey, especially a husband, a father, he gets out there and he works as much as he can. That's the primary way that he takes care of his family. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some of that, and some of that is just like some people. I wouldn't say I get bored. Stop that. Sorry, I wouldn't say I get bored easily. Maybe just because I'm always finding things that I want to do. I'm probably way too hyper for my own good. I thought that would calm down later in life. No, not really so much. Um, I'm kind of one of those people where I'm not fun to, hey, let's watch a movie. Hey, can you put the book down while we watch? No, let me try to do, anyway, I always feel like
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to do too much at once. I
Mm-hmm.
blame some of it psychologically on growing up as a middle child, the forgotten middle child, the one who has to try harder, the one
Mm-hmm.
who gets less attention. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, everybody, look at me. My brothers are both in some ways. They're excellent at what they do. Been very successful. I think that they both are a little bit more calm when it comes to how to enjoy life. I mean, I'm happy, but I do think sometimes I convince myself that that I'm happiest when I'm doing a lot, especially when I'm doing things for other people. That whatever work I'm doing, getting paid is great, but how is this benefiting somebody else?
Yeah.
So do you think at some level there's a low level psychological comparison between you and your brothers in some way from your standpoint that drives some of this, or any other thoughts that go
Mm,
into that?
like I said, I don't know if it seems so much now.
Mm-hmm.
Again, to me, I know birth order really is kind of hit or miss thing in psychology. When I came across it years ago, I was like, oh, this explains everything. I can, but again, a lot of families are smaller. A lot of people today are having one or two kids. So trying to make those comparisons are different. Again, maybe some of it too is just temperament. I always kind of felt like um, I questioned I think my ability more than maybe my siblings did. So I think sometimes I found myself trying really, really hard to be noticed, to do stuff. I struggle even today with, all right, how much of this is about, basically doing good for other people? How much of this is, the money? And then how much of it is the gratification of, wow, I'm just a great guy, look at me doing good for other people. you know
Uh-huh.
of
Mm-hmm.
course I want the largest piece to be the money. No, I want the largest piece to be what I contribute to other people, and second money, and then the smallest I want to be my ego. But that's an ongoing battle.
Well, the
Yeah.
interesting thing is to bring it back to the podcast, I talk about the difference between your real, feel, and ideal. And often the biggest gap, the more discrepancy between those, usually the more distress people have. And that's where you're trying to kind of make sure that your feel and your real match your ideal. And that's again insightful. I think part of your background, obviously, in psychology keeps you more aware. But as you know, there are a lot of psychologists who also need to heal themselves
Yes.
and aren't as aware even as you are,
Right.
so
Yeah,
right.
I will acknowledge uh, that only within the last maybe year and a half, and I entered into therapy for myself. Um,
Hmm.
I, for different reasons, told myself don't need it, too busy, the typical kind of excuses. And of course, it's been beneficial. I knew that all along. It was just like at some point, come on, dude, you're being a hypocrite. you're encouraging all these people to utilize this resource that you yourself could probably, hey, look, if it doesn't benefit, doesn't work out, at least, try it, see what you think of it. It's not for everybody.
Hmm.
But that was another way of, look, if you're going to continue to work at this pace, we all know, especially in the health profession, man, you got to take care of yourself. You've got
Hmm.
to really, it sounds funny to say the word work, but work on that self-care is, what are you doing to refresh, to renewal? How are you making sure that you can
Hmm.
keep pouring out of a glass that isn't
Hmm.
empty?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I want to go back to something you said, Jim, earlier, which I think is interesting. And that is that one of your previous side hustles was umpiring.
Yes.
So, and I'm assuming you're talking about youth sports umpiring, baseball for youth baseball. Is that what
It
you're
was
doing?
largely adult softball,
Okay.
competitive and recreational. Somewhat, some of it was at the teenage level, but for the most part, mostly working with adults. A lot of it was recreational, which you would think, oh, this is going to be great because these are guys that are just out there to have a good time, you know, play a game, go drink a little beer afterward. And yes, there are people out there just having fun, just glad to be playing a game they've loved for years. And then you've got the guys that I don't know, maybe were almost made, a professional team or whatever, or haven't figured out that, dude, this isn't the World Series. It's just we're out here for fun. And I will admit that part of what was a real struggle at first as an umpire was, not having the experience of being official and being someone that's always been a little bit overly sensitive. I'm like, man, what is it with these people? Wow, they get really, really, charged up. They get excited. There was a point actually where I was physically assaulted years ago, which of course had a, really, had a real ripple effect. I don't know if that's the right wording, but it really shook up the rest of the umpires because, of course, it was like, oh, hey, we can't have that. And again, it was like, man, I mean, it's a game. It's supposed to be fun. Um, and it got to a point for me where I thought, if I'm starting to worry about my safety and I'm already finding this to be a lot more stressful than I thought, then maybe I just need to, hang it up and do something different. So I pretty much sadly retired. If I ever went back, maybe I would do like little kids softball, like 4 and 5 year olds. But even then, who knows, with some of the parents these days, you know, some people are just a little too crazy about, my Bobby's going to be a pro athlete someday. So, okay, yeah, but, he's not even potty trained yet. So, dude, calm down.
Yeah. Well, officiating any type of sports, whether it's adults or youth, people get very into it. So I'm sure that people don't understand, I think, how much pressure those guys are under when they're doing it. So that's good for you. So Jim, thanks for sharing all of
Sure.
your experiences and some of the challenges you faced and the successes you've had. And again, congratulations on that.
And
So
I
thanks for
appreciate
doing
your
that.
honesty and sharing some of the underlying, emotions, issues, and even talking about, hey, you started into therapy to understand some of your emotional algebra,
Right.
what brought you this far. So excellent.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on, Jim,
Okay.
and stick around for a minute. If you have time, we'll try to bring you back in at the end here.
Cool.
And Dr. E, just before we get to our next guest, one thing I was hearing there from Jim too, it sounds like, and it's not something I expected going into this episode, but it sounds like, self-esteem can be tied into having a side hustle. I was thinking that this was really just about earning extra money or pursuing a secondary goal in life, but it sounds like just being productive and being helpful to people plays a big part in this.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. Is that sort of what you're interpreting from this as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, we got to look at when people need extra money, that what's the emotion behind that often is fear and scarcity. So we want to understand that, for example, then we'll get to Craig in a sec, but I was going to my local restaurant. I usually grab lunch before I head in, and I was walking out and I saw this girl in a sling. I was like, wow, I hope you're okay. Is everything all right? She goes, well, as a matter of fact, this just happened last night. I was driving for Amazon and I was with a friend and I got out of the car to deliver a package real fast. I realized I didn't put my car in park, and I then had to run back to the car because my friend was looking at her phone and not realizing the car's rolling forward, and we were getting ready to roll off the road. So she jumps in the car to try to stop the car, gets dragged along the road. She said her leg was full of rash. She broke her collarbone, and like I said, that was she was doing to make extra money to pay bills, and then she still showed up at work at this fast food restaurant at 8 o'clock in the morning to make sure she was there on time. So I think what we have to look at here is, yeah, there are a lot of people who feel like they don't have any choice but to have a second job to make ends meet. And I think we got to look at our country that continues to feed this idea that you have to have a certain standard of living, with the cost of things, the cost of having kids, the cost of being able to have the lifestyle we want to give them, and all the things. What are we setting ourselves up to do? And then how much does fear become the factor that pushes us to do the things we do, underlying our rationalizations, justifications, minimizations of our own pains and fears? So Jim's ability to be honest about what motivates him, as well as, mine, me, I recognize some of my motivations are, yeah, I want to have this standard of living that exceeds the already nice standard of living I have now, because there's things I want to do with that. So I have to also be honest with that. But let's go ahead and bring Craig in here and hear his story.
All right, Craig, welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So, Craig, why don't you tell us a little bit about your side hustle that you're doing right now, and what sort of challenges you're facing with it, and so forth.
Sure.
Or I think it was actually one that you did that you're not currently doing, right?
Well, yeah, spoiler alert there, but yeah, so it's been a road. Actually, just hearing Dr. Gani's story, it's very similar to mine, and the drivers behind it. So back in 2020, when COVID hit, I was affected with a layoff, and it was very shocking and traumatizing, to be honest. It was in a company that I loved and an industry that I really enjoyed. Really grew a lot of skills and had done well there. And just with the COVID situation and how it was affecting the industry I was in, they just couldn't keep everybody on. So there was a large layoff. The company did take care of me. I received severance, but I was faced with having to get out there and find something else, and I just wasn't prepared for it. So it definitely affected me. I landed in something fairly quickly, though. I was very aggressive in my job search and landed somewhere, and was only there for about 6 months, and then ended up with another company that was a much better fit for me. And it was full remote, as COVID was still going on. So, I ended up converting a section of my home to a home office, and became very comfortable with a work from home schedule. And, about a year in, I started really kind of looking at my time and going, okay, now that I'm working from home, and I found myself looking at what I was doing with my extra time and feeling like I should be doing something more productive, than playing video games or, whatever, just sort of hanging out. So I had this idea that I was going to put it out there, that I was interested in some contracting opportunities in the same industry that I worked in my main job. So, didn't have a lot of bites at first, but then there was a small company that took me on. It was for a fairly modest amount of money. doing again the same work that I was doing in my first job. So that was in 22. So it started off really just working evenings, which worked out great for me. I have a spouse that has to go to bed fairly early, and so that my evenings were really where I was hoping to slot this in because kids are in bed, wife's in bed. Why not log on and do a little work? So it started out really well, and it fit well. It was a job that I could do while I was watching TV. It wasn't like a big brain type of position, but it was still extra money. So the responsibilities grew, though. This company, they had other things they wanted me to take on. They enjoyed the contributions that I was giving. And so they began to put more onto my plate, and it started to spill over into, hey, could you hop on calls in the middle of the day? And could you, we have a fire drill here and we kind of need you to hop on and see if you can do this. And it started to become, now I'm doing both. I had, 2 laptops on my desk now, and I'm kind of switching between the two. And I started to sort of question if this was going to work out about 6 months in, but then I spoke to them about renegotiating a contract and gave kind of what I thought was a lot of money in my ask. But they accepted immediately. So I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this then, because now it's become almost where I can't turn my head away. So it continued on through into the summer of 23. And then my first job began to go hybrid. So they started to bring people back into the office. So now this became more of a challenge of, okay, the second job's going to have some asks during the day, but if I'm in the office, how am I going to do that? Then it turned into, there were some days I'd bring the second laptop with me into the main job, and there was definitely some stressful times where I'd have to go into the parking lot, almost like I'm undercover now, and I'm doing these other things now in my lunch hour. I'm kind of like running out into the parking lot and doing this. But so just as that was happening, the second job came back and asked me to come in full time. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I'll get to stay remote. I didn't really love the structure of the second job, the company, the management. The first job was a very secure job. I knew that. Second job was going to be a risk if I was going to go on full time. But so I gave them, again, crazy money asks, and they accepted. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to do this. I'll take the risk, I guess. And I didn't hear anything through the entire summer. It just kind of stayed that way. And I stayed hybrid, still worked as a contractor, but then it just dragged on so long that I ended up changing my mind. I just didn't like that they hung me out to dry for so long. And then ended up finding a new first job that was, again, totally remote, while still keeping the second job, even with the responsibilities and the money, also remote. So I was kind of back where I was and very comfortable. I decided I was going to overhaul my home office. I was going to do these 2 jobs at the same time, and I was going to make it work. So it went on like that into 24. And again, it was great. I was working sometimes during the day, roughly 15, 20 hours a week, mostly in the evenings, sometimes during the days. But with this new first job that I had, it was just very accommodating, except that I'd have to travel sometimes. So then now I'm traveling again, 2 computers. I'm in a hotel room at night doing the second job, having to answer phone calls, or sometimes I'd see Teams messages come up on my phone while I'm at my first job traveling, and it started to feel kind of icky. I can't put it any other way than that. But I liked the money. The money was very good. We have older children, so there are some monetary increases that happen with that. So it definitely made life more comfortable, even with sort of the stress that kind of went along with it. So I continued on that road until earlier this year, I started to notice that the second company wasn't doing as well as they had promised, and eventually they went out of business. And just as that happened, the first job notified me that they were reducing their workforce. And then just as the second job was ending, the first job also ended. And it was pretty abrupt. So the entire reason behind me having the second job was to kind of give me that security that if something were to happen like it did in 2020, that I'd have something to fall back on while also making a little extra money. But in the end, they both collapsed at the exact same time, which was very unexpected, and not in my plan. So I found myself back in the workforce and ended up with a great first and only job, which is where I'm at right now, with a pretty healthy pay increase that is basically met the need that I was getting from the two jobs combined previously. So it's actually been a good ending, I'd say, but the road to get here has not been great through the last couple of years for sure. So yeah, that's my story.
So Craig, thanks for sharing all of that. My initial reaction was at some point it was like you're almost juggling laptops, which sounds to me like it could be stressful.
Yes. So I was not open about me having these two positions as Jim was. So in my industry, it's very it's a fireable offense to be working in two jobs, even if it's not in the same industry per se. If you're supposed to be devoting all of your time to that first job. Now, the second job, they knew that I had what I would always refer to as my main gig. And in the beginning, they were very accommodating, but as responsibilities grew, not so accommodating. But I still kept them because the money was good. It's the bottom line.
They knew it was a side hustle. Your main job didn't know that you were doing the side hustle. And that was all of just sort of, it sounds almost like an emotional stressor on you, in addition to the stress of the work that was becoming increasingly demanding from the side hustle. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say the secrecy was honestly the hardest part for me in keeping those two lives separate. And then it's exactly like you said. Yeah, I'd have to travel with two laptops, but make sure nobody saw my other laptop when I was around work people. And even if I always had backup plans in my mind of what I'd say, like, oh, that's my personal laptop, when clearly it was not. But and then just having to just constantly juggle messages, making sure I'm not mixing up emails or things that I'm saying. I found myself analyzing everything I was doing. It's almost not that I have any experience with this whatsoever, but like, I had a wife and this mistress, right? So it's like, I have to make sure I don't mix them up. Like the mistress knows what's happening, but the wife does not. And that was very much my main job and the second gig. But yeah, it was stressful.
So Dr. E, what do you think about this? I feel like this is another surprise here that I didn't think about today. Having this almost secret, the level of secrecy, I wouldn't have predicted that would come up today. So interesting. What do you make of that?
Right. And I think what I like about hearing your story, Craig, is that you started out with every positive intention to do something positive with your time, not really thinking about potential implications and wanting to add to your family, wanting to do something that you felt was going to be benefiting, this business as well as, like I said, as your family and all these things. And then over time, it just grew into this other issue with issues you hadn't really considered. One of the things I talk about in making decisions, and I wanted to bring this up, and this might be a good time to do it, is when people want to consider a side hustle, I think you really want to consider a pros and cons and really look at all those pros and cons, not of starting that side hustle now, but what happens down the line and what happens if it grows or what happens with time commitments. And one of the models is called a decision-making model, a valence decision-making model. And that says that you add a valence or a value to each of those pros and each of those cons. So if you looked at that situation, you said, well, I make extra money, that's a 4 or 5. I get to do something bad in my time, that's a 2 or 3. I get to maybe help out this other business, that's a 3 or 4. Now you go to your cons, I could lose my job, that might be a 10. I might have to have this feeling of secrecy that increases my sense of guilt, my sense of shame. It has me questioning integrity issues. It could affect future employment with other companies. Those are all high valence issues that then might result in somebody going, yeah, I see the benefits now and I see the potential, and do I want to take that risk based on these possible outcomes, and or how do I manage those stressors in those situations? So I think even in that, Craig, is if you had done that exercise before, do you think you would have even thought about some of those pros and cons that I just brought up at the time you entered into that?
Those are great points. I would have to say that I probably would. And the only reason I say that is I've always had this sort of hustler spirit. So a little bit about my background. So I came from a single parent household. I had a parent that worked multiple jobs growing up just to make ends meet. And even from an early age, I was in trouble in school because I would, I'd get things brought home from one of my parents' jobs that, quote unquote, fell off a truck. And then I'd take it to school and sell like packs of bubble gum. And that's just, I've always had that sort of hustler spirit. Even as I got older, I've worked second jobs in the past when I was in my 20s just for some extra money. So I've always been sort of comfortable with that. But as I got into this type of scenario, I knew that there was a high risk, possibly decent reward scenario, different than what I've had in the past. And I was willing to do the homework, as there are. I'm certainly not alone, as we've seen with Jim, and there's plenty of other people that have similar scenarios to mine. So I'd done the homework to kind of cover my tracks per se, which is again a reason why I'm anonymous here. So I've taken like great steps in protecting myself from possibly being found, or even with future employment, which I feel like have been pretty good, and I still feel safe to this day. Now, having said that, what I wasn't protected from, which I thought I would be, was finding myself in that same scenario in 2020. I thought, oh, this is a surefire thing. And now that, 2 jobs got to be better than one. I mean, if something happens with one, I'll have the other. Well, it ended up not working out either. So that's kind of why I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to find something. I'm going to put all of my energy into just that. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And I think that's why Dr. E's advice is so valuable here. It's really a thought exercise you have to do before you get into this, and maybe map out a few different scenarios, and even looking at several years into the future about how things may play out. Because like you said, that just started out as a very manageable, actual just side hustle, few hours a week, right? Mm-hmm. And then it started bleeding into your day job, and then.
Yeah, but I mean, there are long-term benefits. Like I'll never be able to really talk about that second job on any of my resume, any future applications. I mean, even with this job that I'm at now, it was completely not on my resume, because then I have to explain it. Like, you know right. What I mean? So yeah, I mean, there's going to be repercussions probably through the rest of my professional career. And just still a little bit of sort of looking over my shoulder in regards to that. So yeah.
Yep. So it sounds like if you had the opportunity again, you wouldn't take it, from what you've learned through this.
Yeah. I mean, so I have been contacted by a manager at Job 2, actually as recent as a couple of weeks ago. And I told him, I was like, I'm not looking for any other opportunities right now. I have this new job that I've been at for a short while now. That is the only place that I really want to devote my time and energy to. I'm actually enjoying having my evenings back. And now that, if I need to devote some extra time and energy, I like that I can do that with my main gig. and I'm not pressured to have to sort of, devote some time from my time. If you can imagine time as a pie chart, I don't have to cut out some of that time for this second job and sort of put other responsibilities on the back burner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, good. I think that that's what we want people to really take from what we're trying to do here with emotional algebra, is really have people learn from other people's experiences and understand what goes into them making the decisions that they made. And life happens for us, not to us. I think for hearing your story, for me, just being a listener to your story, I'm thankful that this did work out the way it did for you, and job A didn't find out about job B, and all those machinations that could have happened. So I think it sounds like it's worked out pretty well, with some opportunities to learn through that.
And Dr. E, don't you think it's interesting too that Craig is enjoying not having the additional work in the evenings and can do that, but you sort of had to go through that experience to appreciate having a little bit of time back, right? You had to go through the experience of being so stretched so thin, I guess, with your time.
Yeah, and that's why I think when we live in a culture that tends to not want to talk about failure, failure is the greatest teacher. I would say failure tells us when it's time to learn. So people want to hide all these things that have happened in their life that help them become who they are and how they are, and to sometimes appreciate your free time, your family more, the value of your time and energy, and what is the equity of your time versus the equity in what you're getting paid. And so I think that there's so many things that we can grow through this. And I really hope that if people are, listening to this, or the people who do listen to this, if you have a side hustle, really evaluate these factors. Look at the way that you can. Are you really getting out of it what you're hoping to get out of it? Is it affecting your stress and your health deleteriously? So is it a problem, or is it feeding your health? And is that feel like a benefit to you, to have this a side job? So for both our guests, yeah, if for a time it was eustress, it was good stress. And in one, it's continuing to remain in that. The other became distress. And then the side story about the person who was doing Amazon at night. Here you have a situation that they broke a collarbone that, had they not shown up for work, they might have lost job one trying to do job two. And so all these things can enter in. I think we really have to look at, and that's why I think we have to look at our culture and really evaluate our culture and the emotional algebra, the beliefs, the attitudes, the perceptions, the fears, the doubts, the histories, and the possible futures. Those are the things we're going to look at to really decide, what do we want for ourselves? Our economy is based on the idea that you have to keep feeding the monster. And if you keep feeding the monster, then it affects jobs. So we as a country, we as families, we as a government, we as all these institutions in our country, we can't afford a day off in many ways. Americans work more days, I believe, than any other people in any other country, because we feel afraid we can't, because we fed the monsters and we fed the beliefs, and it's driven a lot by fear. Some people say it's pragmatics, but I say it's also fed by fear. And these are the things that I really want people to look at in really making and helping to create our best lives.
Yes. Well, a lot to think about with side hustles. And you point so much out there, Dr. E. Thought exercise, your valence. Say that term again. The
valence decision model.
Valence decision model. That is a great takeaway from today.
Yeah. So Craig, did you have any thoughts, or on some of the feedback I was just providing there?
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% say that the main. Well, so I'm not going to be as probably isn't going to sound as great as Dr. Gagne said. So he wanted to help people. So mine was purely for money. I wanted to help my family. But I also do not work in an industry where I don't provide services like that. So so it's a little different for me. But when we talk about fear, there was definitely a driver there, and it was purely from that experience I had in 2020 when I was laid off from a very comfortable job that I had built a lot of professional relationships at. And I became honestly a bit anti-corporation at that point, where I felt as though getting this side hustle was almost like, for lack of a better term, sort of sticking it to the man, like, okay, I'm going to rage now. I'm going to have this other job, and, I'm going to be out there for myself because I had dedicated all of these years to my primary job, and, and I was shown the door. So I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to be just about myself. I'm going to look out for myself. And even if I have to sort of cover my tracks and sort of do these things that might not be up to other folks' expectation of what might define integrity, but I was just going to be, okay, well, regardless of all that, I'm protecting myself and my company, and myself and my family, and that's all I care about. Mm-hmm. So I think I felt some sort of comfort in that. But in the end, it ended up being false comfort.
Well, I think that's a great point you bring up is, you commented about fear, but I'd also add in there that you felt betrayed by the man, which then fed mistrust, which then developed a sense of justification and rationalization of the reasons why you did it, and then a minimization potentially of the risks or the impact on that. So again, in that, we often look at the most obvious emotions, and that's where, again, I want people to realize, again, how many other, from that standpoint of emotional specificity or the purpose of each emotion, how all those things play in there. Then what else came in when you had the two jobs was guilt and maybe shame and fear, like you said, that mounted into worry and beyond concern with what could happen here. So all of these emotions that are adding up, and then the history that drives into that sense of comfort or security that undermines that foundation of what we're really trying to build in our life. I think those are the things that are some of that algebra that goes into it too.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think too, Craig, I bet your experience is very common among people who go through a similar, job loss, sort of. Well, I don't even know what the word is, but sort of process, I guess.
Yeah, I can tell you for certain, Andrew, that there are, and I don't really want to out the community, but there are dedicated social networks out there of folks that specifically educate each other on the ins and outs of this sort of thing that I was doing. And that's where I did a lot of my research, was just becoming involved with the folks that had, not just two jobs, but some of them would have 3-4 plus jobs, and studying their methods of covering up their social network communications. And then also, there are different methods that companies can use to track activities with other companies. And so, so I mean, there's definitely folks out there that kind of reach out there and support each other, but there is an underlying driver there, and it's exactly what you just said. So it becomes, you have to look out for yourself. You cannot dedicate yourself to a company because in the end, they just don't care about you. But, I still don't know that I feel any different about that. Having gone through all this, as far as, as the dedication of a company to the employer or the employee, I'm sorry. But I will say that I've just devoted more time with my most recent job search and landed at a company that I feel does value their employees much greater than some of the other places I've been at. And so I think I've sort of let down my defenses a bit and learned to trust again. But still at the same time, always keeping that everybody should have an umbrella of protection there. But I've definitely learned to sort of open myself up again and allow people in. And, so that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that things are working out in a positive way for you now. And Craig, thanks for sharing that story. It's really interesting to hear all you've been through and all you've done.
Thank you. I enjoyed my time. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else to add, Dr. E, before we say goodbye to Craig?
I think it was a good discussion. Obviously, we've had some great guests, and the stories are good, and I'd love to hear more. So again, if people want to ever share some of their stories after it's posted, just comment. And again, maybe we can have more discussions on follow-up, because it's the job market is such a critical factor now, and there's so much stress around it.
Yeah. So thank you, Craig. And like you said, Dr. E, I think there's many stories that can be told, many like these, but they're all sort of different in some ways. I thought there were some similarities in what we heard from both Jim and Craig, but also some dramatic differences. And
Absolutely.
I bet that's the case for a lot of people out there. So
yeah, and just another thing for future podcasts, we are looking for people who want to come on as a guest. As you see, we will, if somebody wants to be anonymous, we'll have you be anonymous. But I really want to talk about the things and the issues, emotions, algebra that people are going through every day. And if you have an idea for a show concept, please send me the idea, or just say, hey, I'd like to talk to you. I had somebody on LinkedIn create a whole separate profile who wanted to be a guest on this episode, and it ended up being a profile they created for that. So if somebody wants to do it that anonymously, that's fine. That guest didn't work out in that situation, but again, just to let you know, there's ways to let us know if you want to speak and share your story, and also be part of really exploring your own emotional algebra. So hopefully we hear from people soon, and again, until next time.